Appreciate the opportunity to bring a lesson that is intended to be encouraging. Lessons have different purposes. This lesson is really not to inform you or to challenge you, but primarily to encourage you to take some things that you pretty well know and hopefully to sharpen those up in your mind and then draw some lessons. Mainly, we're going to be shooting for one primary lesson tonight. I'm calling this lesson Jacob's life journey. We all know Jacob took a great journey from Canaan to Haran, and then eventually back. That was quite a journey and return journey. I'm not talking about that journey, but I'm talking about his life as a journey. We often use that figure of speech regarding life, how that life is a journey. So tonight I've chosen to focus on Jacob, a great and a primary character in the Old Testament, and talk about some of the key developments in his life, some of the hardships, some of the difficulties that needed to be overcome, and then really the key factor in all of that that should mean a lot to us. One of the things that we remember the most about Jacob is how he uh, really defrauded his brother Esau. And that was really a dirty trick he played. Tonight, we will start right after that. You remember that set the stage for a lot of fear in Jacob, and he really ran for his life. And of course, his mother, Rebecca, helped him on that. But the first night on his journey, he comes to a place where he sets up a stone as a pillow. I've never tried that. I don't know if you have, but I find that a little difficult. But that's the way it reads. And so this is a place that begins in a most interesting way because you remember it's Jacob's ladder. This dream where there's a ladder or um, stairs leading to heaven, and the Lord God is on top of it. And so I'm beginning to read here. This is going to be our main reading tonight to launch into our lesson. This is reading from Genesis 28, beginning in verse 13. Behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you. I want you to notice that. That's primary in our lesson tonight. God said, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. So from that, You recall how that Jacob continues on his journey and he comes to a well. He's reached his destination. He pretty well figures that. And there's a young lady that comes out, Rachel, and he learns that Rachel is his cousin. Her father is Laban. Laban is his uncle. Laban is his mother Rebecca's brother. And uh, Jacob fell head over heels here. Uh, he he loved Rachel right off, and his love for her never stopped. And so he made a deal. You know, he lived with his father-in-law, and his father-in-law finally said, "Well, there's no need for you to stay here for nothing. Just name your wages, and we can work out a deal." And so Jacob said, "Well, I will work for Rachel," and they agreed on 7 years. And so then the great night came. 7 years was up, and big party, and now the wedding. And Laban tricked him. We all know that. And so the reason for the excuse for all of that was he said, "Well, in our land we don't give a daughter till we give the older daughter first." So he gave him Leah, and he got a bonus wife he didn't want, but he said, "Okay, what could he do? So I'll fulfill her week, and then I'll work another 7 years." So he wound up working 14 years. And out of that, he got two wives, Rachel and Leah. And then eventually, probably not to his liking, also, he got two bonus wives. The two wives, they were competing for bearing children, and so they each had a servant. Though, so they said, "Well, I'll give you Bella, and the other one, these two handmaids or servants, or we probably would call them in biblical language concubines." So here's a big development in Jacob's life. This is where he starts to raise a family. He gets married and starts raising a family. And before it's all said and done, he has 11 sons. 11 sons. And I don't know how many daughters. There was at least one daughter. But of course, they counted sons more back in those days than daughters. And after that 11th son was born, he decided to head home. Now, another really big development here is that he had gotten a raw deal from his father in law. This is Father's Day, I know, but this wasn't the best father or father in law. He had gotten a raw deal on and on and on, time and time again. And so, because of Laban's unscrupulous ways, uh, Jacob wound up getting shafted again and again and again. In fact, he said to his wives, called Rachel and Leah into the field and said, "Well, God has spoken to me and says it's time for me to go home. And I want you to know that your father has changed my wages 10 times." And that was about the size of it. So, anyway, they got all ready and took off. And another development here is that when Laban found out, he chased him down, caught him, and lambasted him. And of course, Jacob lambasted him right back. And Jacob said, "Look, you changed my wages 10 times, and if God had not been on my side, I would have gone home empty handed." So they had some scores to settle, but they finally got things settled down and they parted in peace. Jacob continued his journey on down into Canaan, and Laban went home. And so now the stage is set for another real big development in Jacob's life, and that's the showdown with old Esau. Now, I'm going to mention something here, and got me a big fat note right there. Not forget it. I don't want to forget it later on because I want to tie all this together. When these boys met here in this showdown, they were probably in their 90s. I don't know if you ever thought about that or not, but I think it's pretty certain they were in their mid or late 90s. They were getting up there. But I promise, if I don't do this, you flag me down because I want to tie it together. If I try to do it now, I'll get ahead of myself and I'll mess things up. I'll confuse you. But the stage is set now for this, and Jacob is nervous. Understandably, he's really nervous. Well, God appeared to him that night, and there was a highly unusual wrestling match. And Jacob realized that he was not wrestling with an ordinary person, he was wrestling with God in some way. And that's when God changed his name. God said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but what? Israel, because you have wrestled with God, striven with God and man, and have overcome." So he changed his name to Israel. And of course, 11 sons and one more on the way soon. Those 12 sons became the children of Israel, didn't they? Jacob was Israel. He became the great patriarch of the children of Israel. So then the stage is set. And I think I mentioned the fact that Jacob, in spite of the fact that Laban was unscrupulous toward him, Jacob had prospered immensely. Jacob had become wealthy. In fact, he was so wealthy in flocks and herds that you can add all this up as I did, and I double checked it. He picked out 550 of his livestock as an appeasement gift to his brother Esau. Goats and lambs and camels and cows and bulls, and 550. Staggering. That was just a portion of all of his wealth. That's just part of what he. But remember this story. I know you know this. When they got close together, the first one that made the move was Jacob. And he bowed himself to the ground 7 times, going to meet Esau. And then the next one that made the move was Esau. The Bible says he ran to him. And they fell on each other's neck and they kissed and wept. And so, of course, Esau said, "Well, what's all of this?" And Jacob said, "Well, it's a gift to you." And Esau said, "Oh, no, no, my brother, I have plenty. I have plenty." But Jacob insisted. And in fact, Jacob said, "Seeing your face was like seeing the face of God." It was just a wonderful, we call, reunion, a wonderful reconciliation. It was a wonderful, sweet coming together of brothers that had a lot of strife and enmity. It's just wonderful. So then, of course, Esau wanted him to go with him, and Jacob said, "No, I have just too big a family and too many herds and flocks, and can't go with you." So, but as this story developed, one of the next big developments in Jacob's life was the death of his sweetheart, the love of his life. You remember that Rachel, in giving birth to Benjamin, the youngest son, she had hard labor and she died. And so then that was a big thing in Jacob's life. And the next big thing was the selling of his favorite son. The brothers hated him so much, literally hated him, that they sold him as a slave. And so Jacob had a great loss there. In fact, he suffered thinking for 12 years that Jacob was gone, that he had been torn apart by a wild beast. And then the next great development in his life was reunion with Joseph. Remember, the boys went down, all those went down because of the hard times, the famine. And on their second visit down there, uh, Joseph had all he could take. He wept, he broke down. He revealed himself and he said, I'm Joseph, your brother, much to their troubling. And that's when he said, okay, there have been 7 good years and there have been 2 years of famine. Uh, I want you to think about this because this is where you're supposed to jump in, but you didn't have to because I remembered. He said there's 7 years plus we're 2 years now into the famine. So how much is 7 and 2? It's 9, right? We all there? Are we all there with 9? Well, it had already said when Jacob went into the service of Pharaoh that he was 30. He was 30 years old. So now he's 39. This is very simple. I can do this kind of math. It's very simple. He was 39. And so very quickly things start moving. They go down to explain all of this to Jacob. And this is, of course, a huge development in his life. He finally agrees, yes, my son Joseph is alive. And he agrees we're going to all pack up, we're going to vacate here, and we're going to go live in the land of Egypt. Well, when Jacob got there, Pharaoh said to him, how old are you? You remember that? How old are you? And Jacob said, 130. It's more beautiful in the Bible, but I'm just giving you the simple bottom line, 130. So he's 130 now, and if his son Jacob is 39, how old was he when he was born? About 91, wasn't he? You got that? He was about 91. When Joseph was born, and if you want these passages, they're very easy. I can give them to you. So when Joseph was born, Jacob, his father, was right about 91. And the record is very clear that it was after Joseph's birth that Jacob packed up to leave to go back to Canaan. Sometime after, probably more than a year. The way it reads, you can read it for yourself, but probably several years. I think those commentators, talk about this probably in their mid 90s. How old was Esau? Well, he was the same age because he's a twin, right? And so I'm trying to visualize Esau running. I don't think he's running very fast, but Esau running, he's so eager to come to peace with his brother and for them to end things, as already said, in a sweet way. I think that adds some color. It does for me, and I hope it does for you. But now the things to overcome. This is a summary of Jacob's life. This is Jacob's life journey. But I want to mention here are some things for him to overcome, and this is where we start getting in the application. What did he have to overcome? Well, one thing was his own wrongdoing toward his brother. That was going to have to be answered for. You can't treat your brother like that and not expect to have to answer for that. And he did, didn't he? He knew he knew the scales were uneven. He had to answer for that. Another major problem for him to overcome was serious family problems. So much deep-seated jealousy, and he had caused some of that. I don't know how much he caused. Maybe his father-in-law was to blame, lining up that second wife. And it just got all unraveled, but he had a lot of serious family problems to overcome. A third thing was he was the victim of unfair treatment. His father-in-law was unfair to him. A fourth thing was a lot of heartache. He had a lot of heartache. Just imagine his heartache when the love of his life, Rachel, died. And then when he lost his son, what grief he lived with for 12 years, convinced that his beloved son Joseph was dead. He had a lot of heartache. And then finally, it's pretty clear as we read, by the way, he lived, according to the record in Genesis, he lived to be 147 years old. So from the time he stood before Pharaoh, 130, he lived another 17 years. But you can read the record there. He obviously became weak. He experienced failing health and became frail. And that's something all of us eventually will deal with our loved ones and with ourselves, and they with us as well. So, what's the main ingredient in all of this? And I want to get to this. This is the main thing we're driving at the whole time in this lesson. The main point in this journey, the main point in Jacob's journey, is that God was with him. And it doesn't just say it one time, it says it again and again. And so let me just read some of these key verses. Rereading Genesis 28 and verse 15. God said to Jacob, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then a second occasion when it comes out strongly that God had been with him was spoken by Jacob himself when he got ready to go back to the land of Canaan. He didn't make that decision on his own, but God said, "Jacob, it's time for you to go back." Jacob called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was and said to them, "I see that your father does not regard me with favor." This is Genesis 31, beginning in verse 4. "I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me." Note that. The God of my father, that's Genesis 31 and verse 5. "The God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me." That's a profound confession by Jacob. That's a great confession. How he saw how God was with him and he gave God the credit. It wasn't just him struggling, he was struggling, but God was with him. God was his partner. God was right at his side. Jacob was doing it all, but not by himself. Isn't that important? Jacob was doing it all, but never by himself. He said, "God was with me." And then when he met Jacob, he had it out to him face to face. This is Genesis 31, verses 41 and 42. These are Jacob's words to Laban. He says, "These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." Of course, this refers to the fact that the night before, God had appeared to Laban and said, "Don't touch him. Be careful what you say to him. Don't say anything to him, good or bad." God protected him. And so Jacob knew it. Jacob said, "You cheated me. If God hadn't been on my side, I'd gone home empty-handed." God saw it. God spoke to you about it. And then the fourth occasion is in Genesis 35 and verse 3. Genesis 35 and verse 3. After Jacob had gotten settled back in the land of Canaan, and after the terrible slaughter that two of his sons had committed against the men of Shechem, God evidently felt that Jacob needed some renewal and encouragement. And so he called him back. God called Jacob back to Bethel. And he said to him, Genesis 35 and verse 1, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar to God. And so Jacob speaks to his family about this in verse 3. Listen to these words. Genesis 35, verse 3. Jacob says to his family, then let us arise and go up to Bethel so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone. So again, Jacob confessed it. Then in Genesis 46, you know, when the brothers went to Egypt to get grain, the second time they came back, they knew their brother Joseph was alive, and they're trying to convince their father. And he's not going to hear it, but they show all the evidences, you know, the wagons and how that arrangement had been made to pack everything up and to go down to Egypt. And Jacob realized it. And he said, this is Genesis 45 and verse 29. He said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is alive. I will go and see him before I die. But you know, a man that's going to launch out like that, 100, how old did I say it was? 130 years old, right? Just think about that. 130 years old, going to make a trip like that. He's bound to have a little bit of doubt. So in Genesis 46, God appeared to him. He said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. Then God said in verse 3, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I also will bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So here again, God encouraged him, said, Jacob, don't be afraid. You go on down, I'll be with you. You won't be alone. Finally, this is the last one. When Jacob is near death, he called all of his sons around his bed, and he says to his sons, he says to Joseph, this is Genesis 48 and verse 21. Israel said to Joseph, we should be calling him Israel by now. Israel said to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. So Israel was firmly convinced God had been with him. He was convinced God would be with them. God would continue to guide them, and through his strength and his enablement, they could prevail. They would prevail. So this is a lesson I need. This all of us need. When we're discouraged, we need to remember Jesus said in Matthew 28 and verse 20, I am with you. I am with you to the end of the ages. I'm with you to the end of the world. And the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 13, he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. What shall man do to me? There's so many times in our lives we just need to hear God say, I'm with you. Times we get discouraged, times we're uncertain, times when things are not going good at work, times when things are not going good with a fellow worker, some misunderstanding, maybe things are not going too well in the family, with spouse, with children, with parents. Sometimes when we're uncertain, sometimes when we feel alone, sometimes when we're sick, just sick. and it doesn't look bright. The future doesn't look bright. We just need to remember God is with us. That's a constant message. Jacob learned it, and one of the reasons I love Jacob so much, he has such drawing power to me, is because in a lot of ways he was just messed up. How do you ever straighten things out? Well, it took God, didn't it? But isn't it marvelous how things got all straightened out? Got all straightened out because God was with him. So I hope this is something will help you to remember in your journey. Your journey, my journey is not like Jacob's. It's altogether different, but God is with us. If there's anything we can do tonight to be encouragement to you, if we can assist you in any way in your spiritual needs, if we can be of any help, any service whatsoever, we ask you to come, and while together we stand and sing.
I am resolved.